welcome to another episode of DSC's Charity Questions. So today we've got two guests. We've got Richard Sved and Claire Routley, who are the co-authors of our new book, Fundraising Strategy. So welcome to the podcast, Richard and Claire. Richard, if you could just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thank you. Hello, George. I'm Richard Sved. I've worked in charities all my life, pretty much, all my working life, and volunteered back when I was a student and ever since. I primarily work in fundraising. I've been leading the fundraising function I've led the fundraising function for 9 national charities now, but I also work in governance and strategy and communications.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Richard. 9 charities. That's amazing. It's great work. And Claire, please introduce yourself.
So, yeah, I'm Claire. Like Richard, I am a charity lifer, having accidentally fallen into charity fundraising after university. So again, like Richard, I've worked across a range of different charities. But I suppose I wear multiple hats now, really. So I spend quite a bit of my time as like you, George, as a fundraising teacher. Yeah. I also work as a consultant, specialising particularly in legacy fundraising. And I spend a bit of the week working at the Centre of Philanthropy at the University of Kent.
Perfect. Great. So is it, do you work with Katie Ramone? Is she familiar with that degree as well? Has she been working in that area?
I don't think we've met, although I do have the world's worst memory for
Don't worry,
for
don't worry.
names.
I know that she's also been involved in some sort of degree purposes. Great. So today we're going to talk about fundraising strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit about the book, but also kind of how you ended up as authors on this as well. So I know a lot of our listeners, they're going to be wanting to know, I want a fundraising strategy. What do I do? So I'm a new charity. I maybe just recently registered. I have a bank account. Why do I need a fundraising strategy? And what would be the first thing I do?
I think to get started, and really I suppose this is where we start in the book, isn't it, Richard? But by looking at the environment. So we talk about the importance of carrying out a fundraising audit. And I think sometimes when you're creating a strategy, the temptation is to jump straight into, okay, what we're going to do, the doing bit. But, I always say it is worth taking the time, and actually probably about, half of the time in developing your strategy to take a really good look at what's going on, both in the external world, but also to take quite a deep look at your own organisation and think about your own sort of skills, abilities and weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Because really then it means your strategy is going to be the most effective strategy going forwards, because it's built on what's going on in the world around you and what your own sort of ability to do is.
Absolutely. So we take a look at ourselves. What kind of thing might we be looking for?
I'm looking at. Sorry, go for it, Richard.
Sorry to jump in. So I would say understand your cause. Listen above all else. So listen to your supporters. Listen to the people you work with. Above all, listen to the people that you represent and that you're fundraising for. That's the main thing. Understanding your mission, I would say. Auditing what's worked from a fundraising perspective. Understanding your audiences, and then tailoring messages for those audiences. I think that's, if there was any sort of rough order, that would be it, I would say.
I like that, and especially the auditing, actually. And so by an audit, do you mean physically looking back at the fundraising that may have happened in the past and the success of that? Is that what you think? Yeah, absolutely. So how viable has things been? And would you look at maybe specific events that have potentially been run and how successful they've been, that kind of level, yeah? Yes,
data. Absolutely. both quantitative and qualitative.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the same thing I talk about in my training. The voice of the beneficiary is so important. And if we can't put that into place, and when we're looking for the voice of the beneficiary in terms of funders, would they maybe like videos, written testimonials? What kind of stuff are you looking for your beneficiaries, for their voice? Go on, Claire, you were nodding.
All of the above, really.
I
think you almost answered your own question there, George. I think, and I guess it sort of depends a bit on the organisation, who your beneficiaries are and how easy it is to be able to sort of go out and talk to them. But I think absolutely, as Richard said, listen, using whatever channels there are available to you, really.
Absolutely. Great. So let's say on the other side of things then, because again, I know a lot of fundraising managers and CEOs of small charities who are really successful, potentially not knowing why they're successful. And they may be hitting the grindstone every single year, getting the bids in, getting the money in, and doing the same thing over and over again. So potentially not necessarily having a strategy. There's probably a strategy in their head, but not necessarily something on paper. What would you say to these people that would maybe help them to understand why they need a strategy? Go on, Claire.
Well, the first thing I would say is brilliant. You probably do already have a strategy, but you need to get it out of your head because, frankly, and I wouldn't want to be morbid, but you may be hit by a bus one day, and not be able to return, or just leave. Absolutely, exactly.
Probably the preferable option.
And one of the key points of our book is that we're not saying stop your fundraising so that you can write a strategy. What we're saying is you write your strategy based on the fundraising that you're already doing and what you could do.
I love that.
Yeah.
So don't stop what you're doing. Congratulate yourself and think about what you're doing and what you're doing well. So those are the main things. But also, what about? It's not just you. You may be responsible for doing the fundraising work, but what about people that are accountable for it, like your trustees? How do they know what you're doing and what their role is? And those are the main things. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, do you know, I when I was thinking about some of the questions we were going to answer in advance, I wrote down almost exactly the same as you, Richard, in the sense of you do have a strategy, absolutely. And actually, at the beginning of the book, we talk about Henry Mintzberg and different ways of characterising strategy. And one of the ways he characterises them is just pattern. You kind of fall into a pattern of doing things, which is almost what you're describing there, George. But I suppose the other, just to add to Richard's point, I guess the other thing is, if it's just sort of evolved in that way over time, if it's working for you, brilliant, but actually maybe it's not optimal. And so it is worth taking that time just to step back and say, okay, we've been doing this and it just seems to be working quite well, but could we do things better?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is it. Sometimes you succeed in spite of those things that you're doing that you think may be positives, just getting on with it. But the reality is you step back, take the time, we could be more effective, couldn't we?
Yeah.
And what about resistance? I know that there's, in terms of talking to CEOs, sometimes it can be quite hard to get a strategy out of the teams they manage. They might not be directly responsible for the fundraising at an operational level. Do you find resistance to strategies? Any tips you would give to maybe fundraisers that are struggling to meet the demands of building a strategy?
There is a little.
Go on. You go first.
Keep jumping in. Sorry. There is just an interesting little story that jumped out to me again when I was thinking about this. And again, in the book, what we do is sort of talk about a sort of change management process that you can go through. And one of the very first sort of stages of that is just sort of how do you demonstrate the need for change? And I don't think we mention it in the book, but there's a lovely little story that I would credit if I could remember where it's one of those stories you just kind of buzz around in your head. So it's not mine, but I can't remember exactly where I read it. But they tell a little story about a commercial organisation that was really resistant to the idea of having a new sort of purchasing policy in place. It sounds really dry and boring, doesn't it, really? But what they did to actually sort of show the need to change was essentially got a great big pile of gloves and put the price labels on each of these gloves and just dropped them on the boardroom table. And then they said the board members sort of looking through, going, hang on a minute, this glove, which is exactly the same as this glove, cost $1, and this one cost $3, and this one cost $5. So after years and years and years, we're trying to make a rational argument for why they should change. It was actually just dropping all these gloves on the table and people sort of looking through and realising, just seeing for themselves the disparity. They've got this new sort of purchasing process put in place. Absolutely. So sort of waffling off on that little long story, sometimes it's just thinking about, how do you sort of show people the need to change in a, interesting, different, perhaps dramatic dramatic way, because we don't always respond immediately to the sort of the clear and rational argument in the way that we'd like to think we do.
I love that example, and it could almost be, this is what we could have had actually, or this could have been the services we delivered. We could have reached X percentage more people actually if we'd done that.
Yeah, and really sort of showing that to people, rather than just number in a report.
There's something else that we put in the book, which is about how you understand and address disconnect, if you like. And we classify it in 3 different ways, and then talk about how you might mitigate those gaps. So the first one would be that your colleague or the person that's resistant to change doesn't get what you're trying to do. In which case you might need to think about the information you're providing. Secondly, they might not like it, in which case you need to think about values essentially. And thirdly, that they might not trust you or the organization. And this is on a very broad level and sounds trite, but essentially it's one of those 3 things largely that causes resistance. And with the final one, you're talking about relationships and repairing those essentially.
Absolutely. It's a management discussion almost more than a fundraising discussion at that point.
Exactly.
Absolutely. How can we make you see the value of this? What would it look like if we had a fundraising strategy? Those kinds of questions. Great. So kind of looking at the current charity climate, it's from being a fundraising volunteer for a charity called St Mary's Secret Garden. We were unable to deliver our services last year in the way that we were funded to do that, and luckily we had reserves, so we were able to have that sort of financial resilience there. But there's a lot of organizations that didn't have that resilience. They didn't have those reserves, and probably have now closed down, a lot of them. And so thinking about the maybe climate of the moment, where potentially it's not unheard of now that there may be changes to our services that we weren't expecting, is there anything we can do in our fundraising strategies to build in financial resilience? I can see you both nodding there. Who wants to take it?
I'm looking at Richard because I know Richard's got a really good answer to this.
Go on, Richard,
He added it to the book.
Well, Claire is the senior partner in writing this book, so I was always expecting Claire to answer first. But I'll jump in. So I don't know if you're expecting me to talk about mission versus money matrix, were you, Claire? Because that's the answer that I was going to give when I got a sneak preview of these questions. So essentially, it's always about diversity of income, even more so now. And a very, very simple matrix that I've found useful always, but even more so now, is dividing your income into whether it's on mission or off mission. And whether it makes you money or needs to be subsidized. And obviously, if it's not making you money and it's off mission, you definitely shouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely.
But I would say now more than ever, charities need to be thinking about the relationship between things that might not be quite on mission but will make you money. And things that you want to do and have to do, that you all need to subsidize, and it's the cross relationship between those 2 that I would say are the answer.
That's it. And as long as you're considering your objects, that seems like a nice step to take. Claire, what do you think? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Richard's already mentioned it, but that idea of diversification as well, because I think that's the one thing that COVID really showed us, wasn't it, is that you can't really, or ideally don't really rely on one single source of income. And it was people that had a good sort of diversified fundraising portfolio that seemed to come out of the situation
absolutely
in a better position, really.
You're right, and it's the difficult decision now sometimes as well. Potentially, if you're looking to build an individual campaign, it might cost you money this year to do that, but the benefits down the line would be that you have that resilience. Perfect. And so considering now something slightly different, what about ethical fundraising? So I talk about it a lot, but it's become a bit more of a larger topic the last couple of years. What role does ethical fundraising play, and should we feel entitled to be able to turn down funders that maybe we either don't have the gut feel or objectively just aren't a good fit for our organisation? How do you feel about that now? Because considering we need the money more than ever.
I think the phrase you used about the gut feel is a really interesting one, because I guess it is important to have perhaps, I would argue, more of that sort of planned approach to ethics in a way, so that you're thinking about, okay, and again, we say it in the book, but one of the things we argue is it's really good, before you encounter any of these ethical dilemmas, to think about, what's our sort of core underlying approach to ethics, what's the kind of almost the ethical theory that's going to underpin everything. So we draw a lot on the work of Ian McQuillan and Regare here.
Okay.
And so you might, for example, have a sort of core sort of underlying approach, which is all about trust. So, that's, every sort of ethical decision we make, we're thinking about how does this impact on public trust, for example. It's probably not the very best or easiest to use.
Good example,
theory, but
especially if you get money from individuals.
Yeah. So I suppose we do our best to sort of take some of that gut feeling out. We're trying to be as carefully thought through as possible, because I guess every time we turn down money, that is potentially harmful to our beneficiaries. Although I'm sure there is also the counter argument that taking money from the wrong sources is harmful to our beneficiaries. So
it's difficult, isn't it? And so, would you consider a policy? That's what I would sometimes recommend.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go on, Richard.
I was just going to add about my own evolution of thinking over the last couple of decades on this, in that when I've been writing policies on this in the past, all I really thought about in the olden days was about the funder. Are they investing in arms or tobacco or whatever, and those sorts of questions, and clearly they're important. But what I've really come to realize over the last more recent 10 years is that it's as much about the people you're fundraising for, your community, and the values and representing the people who you work with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as important as the funder itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so you would take that into consideration, of course, in a policy as well. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that we all have to consider, isn't it? And it's always difficult to say no to money, but as you say, creating a problem for another charity, actually, it's one of those decisions.
Yes, I wrote when you said should we turn down that funding, my short answer would have been yes. And I know from my A-level days that I need to write longer answers than that. So it's probably yes, but
yeah, absolutely. There's a conversation there, and potentially other partners, and great. So one of my colleagues, Ricky, she has asked about myths in current fundraising. So are there any myths you want to bust? I have one that I can suggest. Are there any myths you think that fundraisers may share that you want to bust today, or I can suggest one as well?
Yeah, I'll start. So credit to Caroline Danks, a fellow fundraising consultant who coined this exact phrase, but really summed up for me one of the myths, and she said, "I am not your little black book." And so often I've come across charities that want to bring people in because of who they know, and their access to them.
Absolutely.
And really that myth needs to be busted, because it's not going to work and it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And arguably not ethical, having just talked about ethics.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to what we boasted, actually, the idea that you do need to know people to be successful as a new fundraiser, and that's not necessarily the reality. If you were a new fundraiser and you were joining a role as somebody without the contacts, is there anything you would do if you were in that position and you didn't have those contacts in your network straight away? anywhere you could prospect fundraising information?
I think it goes back to our original answer to the first question, which was all about listening and undertaking that fundraising audit. So essentially drawing out diagrams and working out who knows whom, and the connections you've already got as an organisation rather than as a single person.
You're absolutely right.
There's a little story actually that someone who's a new fundraising director at a hospice told me once, where they were desperate for someone to come and open a fete, I think, one of those type of events anyway. Struggled for a while to find somebody, and then somebody eventually mentioned, and I might be misremembering exactly, but it's something like, my cousin is a Premiership footballer or something like that, and it just sort of showed the value of, exactly like Richard said, when you sort of map the networks of sort of people within your organisation and who knows whom, and that you're only 7 steps removed from anyone you want to know, really, so I think comes true. You've probably got a lot of contacts already that you just didn't realise.
Yeah, and Cara Logan, the American fundraiser, she says we have to be just as focused on the funding of our services as we do the delivery, and that's for everybody, not just the fundraisers. And having that conversation enables people to think, well, how can I build on that? That's so true, isn't it? We do all have a network, don't we? That would be very nice if you did know a fresh Premier League footballer. That would be good, wouldn't it? On my job application, well, I do know a Premier League footballer. Perfect. So what about the not necessarily the current climate, but kind of fundraising going into the future? We had a great question from Neil McLaren on our Twitter, and he asked, where do you think fundraising will be in 2, 5, 10 years? So let's start at 2 years' time. Where do you think we will be with our fundraising? Who wants to take that one?
I'll start, and then Claire will chip in more sagely. So I would say, look at the rise of fundraising from gaming, in particular, as a growth area. Look at hybrid events, and I think we may well talk in the next 5-10 minutes about digital more. But how digital fundraising is changing the landscape, essentially, and it will continue to do so over the next 5 or 10 years. Look at crowdfunding, and donors being part of a movement. Key areas that I've noticed a growth in, but then there are also old favourites and previous Cinderellas like legacy fundraising and community fundraising. They're going to stay important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go on, Claire.
Yeah, I think I kind of went off on a little tangent slightly when I was thinking about this question, partly because I'm reading a really interesting book at the moment, which is called Generations. It's Generations, Does When You're Born Shape Who You Are? And it's both fascinating and scary in equal measure, actually, because it talks about, I guess this is something that was sort of floating around in the environment anyway, but it really sort of quantified for me Millennials and Generation Z, and essentially it talks about the pressures that those people are under, and how they're actually poorer than their parents' generation at the same age, essentially, with wealth sort of increasingly concentrated amongst older age groups. And I guess so it kind of alludes back to the myth-busting question in a way, because I know a lot of people, come on courses that I'm involved in and almost sort of say, our database is, predominantly aged over 50, and we need to bring in more young people.
Yeah.
But actually, the people that potentially have got money to give away are, the old generations.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I know, there are surveys that say millennials are, incredibly sort of would love to become involved in charities, and want to make the world a better place and all of that lovely stuff, but they just don't have the spare cash to give away that their parents do. So I think that's a bit of a sort of I was reading it thinking maybe more in the sort of 10 years frame, but it feels like it's a sort of existential crisis for us as fundraisers, really, that if millennials just literally don't have the money to get involved, at that younger age, how are they going to sort of they're giving charity evolve over time?
Absolutely. And you,
And
so we've got a bit existential there, but
no, you're one of my favourite topics. Go on, Richard.
I was just going to add that I saw a chart last week, which showed that the amount saved by people in this country has absolutely rocketed since COVID.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And it did after the 2008 recession as well. And yes, I'm sure that they are largely older savers.
Absolutely.
But there is lots of money that's currently in people's savings.
Absolutely.
That people might want to donate to charities. But even so, I talked a little bit about crowdfunding and thinking about that next generation and trends. I'm seeing a lot more about donor involvement. So older generations perhaps are often one step removed from the charity in their giving, whereas now the younger generations, I think, want to be more involved. So whether it's campaigning or volunteering, and there's less of a wall between that and donating. And if your charity can take advantage of that, then
that might,
I think that's
I guess, solve my problem. in the sense of, if people can't get involved financially at a younger age, perhaps that's how we sort of develop those relationships. Then, Richard, people involved in different ways, and they eventually might get more involved in the giving side as well.
And Claire, you touched on something that I'm a big fan of at the moment, generational theory, a similar book, The Fourth Turning, that was written about Gen Y, Gen Z, and they predicted a pandemic of some sorts in this time period. And this would be the unraveling, they call it, where we have the responsibility to build the future, actually, of the working world. People like Greta have the responsibility to kind of take forward the world and build what it looks like. So even on a 2-year scale, what the work you're doing here and the books like Fundraising Strategy is potentially shaping this. And I think Richard nailed it. If people do want to get involved, they may not be able to give money. They can give time. They can give ideas. A lot of people are doing free fundraising, like sort of social media campaigns without any registered governance or anything. So there's a lot of positive change. Do you see a lot of this stuff, this kind of just social media campaigns that aren't linked to anything? And do you think charities could tap into that in some way? This is kind of it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing it all the time, especially from campaigning organisations who are doing this really well. So organisations like War and Want, for example. Asking people to get involved, whether it's by signing pledges or whatever, but also, but they are also bringing in members at the same time. So it's giving it a lower level to show your support and affiliation. But you can also do stuff.
And I guess there's that sort of breakdown, isn't there, of that sort of, the way you do good is to give money to charity. Actually, particularly, I guess, for the younger generations, the way you do good is shop sustainably, and so that sort of very clear demarcation between charity and company, and I think that's sort of breaking down as well, really, isn't it?
That's true. Which has an impact on charity, because it's less need for charities to serve. So that's a good point, actually. I like that. So what about any campaigns you've seen that have been really interesting? Any campaigns that during COVID that have been really eye-catching for either of you two?
Yeah, I can start on this one, Claire.
Oh, Richard,
one I liked that I saw recently was not necessarily a fundraising campaign, but still a campaign. I think I loved was from Sue Ryder Care, which was I think called Grief Kind. And it had lots of advice on how to cope with grief and bereavement, and within so talking about things that are often difficult to talk to, squarely within the charity's expertise, and an ask, but more subtly within it. So I just thought that was beautifully done. It's called Grief Kind. Do have a look.
Nice, we will. Yeah, definitely. I'm sure the listeners will be Googling that now. Yeah. What about you, Claire? Have you seen any?
I suppose as well, not so much a campaign, but I was thinking, what sort of really impressed me. And one of the sort of approaches to fundraising I've seen that just I think has been fantastic, and perhaps you don't seem to see talked about that much, is the approach that Christians Against Poverty have.
Okay. Yeah.
And essentially, I was really impressed with it because they break down the silos between fundraising and service delivery. So essentially, what they do is they in a Christian organisation, they do a lot of work with churches, and they sort of set up their sort of debt counselling services within a church. But then they say to the church, we need to be able to sort of come and talk to your congregation about regular giving. Yeah. They also, as far as I know, when they negotiate debt arrangements on behalf of clients, the corporates need to sort of give a donation back at that point as well. I'm sure there's lots of other lovely things they do, but what really impressed me about their approach is that there's a sense of sort of organic growth between services and fundraising. Okay. So as their services grow, they do more and more work, but actually their fundraising grows almost quite naturally alongside it. Yeah. And it just, so often when we work with organisations, one of the big problems we come across is this sense of siloing. And fundraising happens over here and service delivery happens over here, and occasionally there's conversations when we're putting in grant applications, but near the twain shall meet otherwise. And I just thought it was amazing that you have this sort of organic relationship between the two. And I think organisations that can break down those internal silos, I think really well positioned to move forwards.
Absolutely, and that links all the way back then to the trustees being engaged. And I remember the CEO at the charity I was a trustee of, she would make a really big point every time to go through the projects and the fundraising, and it takes you a few meetings to catch up to it, but then you expect it and you know it, and if people asked you, you would actually understand, which is it's vital, isn't it? Again, how can we link that up? I like that. It's really nice. Do you see more organisations considering that step now and thinking about that actively?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talk about in the book is a much more sort of agile approach, but probably with a big A and a small A.
Yeah, that's hard to. It's easy to say, hard to necessarily do, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's essentially a fundamental restructuring. I suppose if you do it with the big A, it's a fundamental restructuring of your, perhaps even the entire organisation, but
hierarchy,
the fundraising side of it. So.
Yeah. What might it look like when someone had restructured? What might that team look like?
So again, I think there's a kind of methodology that you can follow there. Again, if you're going for agile with the big A, with the idea of, again, sort of, I guess I kind of alluded to that because of the breaking down of silos, and I think that's one of the things it sort of aims to do. So the idea that you've got people, don't have your sort of legacy fundraiser and your community fundraiser, you've got sort of interdisciplinary teams, for want of a better term. So yeah, the idea that you're breaking down, almost sort of again naturally breaking down some of those internal silos in an organisation.
I like that. Go on, Richard. What do you?
No, I was thinking about fundraisers' careers and the fact that we have kind of put people in boxes over the years, and actually any type of fundraising is about building relationships with people, and those are transferable skills. Absolutely. Across types of fundraising, and so I'd love to get people out of boxes and learning from each other, essentially.
Yeah, definitely.
I like that. So I think this alludes to something I wanted to talk about. We will come back to some digital because I want to talk about that. But actually, new fundraisers qualifications, Claire, you're obviously very well qualified in this area. What could you, let's say I'm a new fundraiser, I want to start out, I'm just finishing college and I'm going to go to university. You said that we should be looking to be wide and approach fundraising from the wide perspective. That's great. What would you recommend I do if I wanted to become qualified as a fundraiser? Go on, Claire.
Partly it's about thinking about what works for you personally in terms of your learning. Absolutely. Rather than necessarily there being the perfect route. I mean, you mentioned university, but interestingly, there's a whole range of apprenticeships coming down the line at the moment. So that, I mean, they can be, as far as I'm aware, taken by people who are, do have a degree, but also it's a sort of alternative route for people that don't necessarily want to go to university. So that's increasingly going to be an option, I think.
Yeah.
And then there are fundraising qualifications, certificates, diplomas that are offered by Chartered Institute of Fundraising,
we
but
can
also
now say
the FSI.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
A range of courses at DSC.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And for those who do like the sort of the more academic angle as well, there's a couple of organisations, and I have to say, including the University of Kent, where I teach, off master's level qualifications as well. So there's there's something out there for everybody, really, I think, depending on what your aims are, how you enjoy learning.
Yeah. And are you able to share what some of your maybe master's students have gone on to do? Is there any good examples there of what they've gone on to do?
I mean, a lot of the students that come through the master's programme at Kent, I think, are already working as fundraisers, or sometimes things like wealth advisors as well. It's not sort of it's not purely fundraisers. I think across all the courses I teach, though, what is quite interesting is, people do quite often tend to move to the next level, even if that wasn't necessarily their intention when they started the course. They might have just come to the course because they wanted to, consolidate some of the knowledge they already have, for example. Yeah. But I think there is something about, taking a course and learning and improving your skills, which just sometimes gives you the nudge to, step up to the next level in your career, really, because you just want the challenge. Actually, you've enjoyed learning, taking on new skills, and you want to really sort of put them into practice. So we do see a lot of people step up in their careers.
Yeah.
And there's qualifications that Claire's talked about, and there's training like the courses that are provided by DSC and others. I think it might be harder as a provider of training, but it's great as a recipient. I think the choice has never been greater with providers like DSC, but also on online providers like Fundraising Everywhere, IFC, and so on. And actually, that democratization, if you like, has accelerated because of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
That it's much easier now to open your laptop and learn stuff. And in terms of careers and emerging leaders, a shout out also to the CLAW Social Leadership program, which is worth a look.
Perfect. The CLAW Social Leadership program, I've not heard of that. I'll have to check that out. And definitely, big fans of Fundraising Everywhere. Simon is a great leader of that organisation, along with his colleague, and they've done great work there. And almost, it's unbelievable they did it before the pandemic, and how suddenly they was almost best suited, weren't they, to support us during that time. They did a lot of great work over the last couple of years. So what about looking back at your careers, knowing what you know now? Would either of you make any changes to your careers? Go on, Clay, you go first.
Do one of the things I think I would get better at is I don't know if this is the best term, but sort of the almost the internal politics side of things. I've never been much of a sort of, again, for want of a better term, sort of political animal. And I think, but actually, the more I've gone on, the more I've realised, it's not just about sort of fundraising externally; it's about being able to sort of manage the internal situation in which you're fundraising, and as we sort of alluded to when we talked about organizational change, it almost feels now that you kind of need, you've got your external facing strategy, but you almost need a sort of mirror internal strategy to get people on board, to bring people along with you, all of that really good stuff. And I think that was something that just never really crossed my mind very much in the sort of the early stages of my career. But I think especially as you get more senior and you have to be an advocate for other people, you have to potentially be an advocate for your fundraising team. You need to be able to sort of manage those sort of internal issues. So I think that's something I wish I was a bit more alive to earlier on. Really.
Definitely. What about you, Richard?
So my answer is one thing that I didn't do soon enough, and one thing that I think I did too soon.
Okay.
So the thing I didn't do soon enough was mentoring and being mentored.
Okay. Yeah.
And I first became a mentee of having been in the charity sector for 10 years, and I should have started sooner because I benefited so much from that. And then the last 10 years or so, I've loved being a mentor too, for so many reasons, not least that I benefit from it at the same time. And I think it's never too early to start mentoring.
I like that.
So a shout out to mentoring and being mentored. And the thing I think I did too soon was going into. I did a master's in voluntary sector organisation quite soon after I graduated, and as I moved into the sector really as a professional. And really I wish I'd waited because I've learned so much over the years, over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years about what works. And I would love to have applied that learning now, rather than as a very recent graduate.
Such a
you have to do a PhD, Richard.
Yeah, maybe I should.
And Claire, you've done a PhD. Can you just let the listeners know what your PhD is in?
Oh, my PhD is in legacies and why people leave legacies to charity.
Amazing. And what made you do that?
I think I just loved learning, actually. So I did some, I'm showing my age here because there wasn't really much of a fundraising qualification structure. So I did marketing qualifications part-time whilst I was starting out as a fundraiser, and then just really loved studying. So I just I wanted to carry on. So it was my slightly nerdy hobby, I have to admit.
Oh, good. It's definitely not my hobby, Claire. Sorry. No, it's very amazing. It's great. It's a great qualification. Yeah. Go ahead. Did you have anything to add, Richard?
No, I think we've done that question, George.
Oh, good. So just to circle back then, let's pick up on the digital tech point then. So we mentioned crowdfunding and the kind of the future a little bit. I'm thinking of things like Facebook donations, Smile.Amazon. What kind of wacky digital future of fundraising things are there out there that when we're doing our strategy, we could at least be considering, even if it's something we're not doing straight away? What's the
so in terms of the digital era, I would say that the advancements have really meant that we can, going back to the fundraising audit answer that we gave right at the beginning, really enable us to slice and dice our data in ways that we were never able to before. And it's now much easier to get time with people, but most importantly, it's really going to enable charities to enhance their responsiveness to supporter experience. So I remember a long time ago, all I could do really was check a box that said no, they don't want to receive a newsletter, or yes, they only want to hear from us once a year. And now we can really be so much more responsive than that. I don't know about wacky, George, but in terms of digital fundraising strategies, digital technology informing fundraising strategies, it's definitely worth watching Facebook challenges, for example. Interestingly, we're going to wrestle with issues of control more and more because these things aren't happening on our platforms. They can still be, we can still give a strong user experience, but we need to watch how we give that experience, because we're not entirely in control of how we run it, I would say.
I like that. Absolutely. Yeah. Just be mindful of that. Anything else on digital tech?
Actually, again, with look, when we had our first reviews back from our external reviewers, somebody pointed out, why are you not talking about AI? So we had a little dip into what AI is likely to mean for fundraising. So, and you know, I'm really glad that they pointed that out, because actually there was you know, some really fascinating info that we dug out, and it kind of relates to what Richard was saying about almost the, you know, the database in the background and what's happening in the background. Yeah. But what I loved was the idea that, you know, AI can actually be doing a lot in the background. So it was saying, for example, it could be AI could be pointing out that, you know, these donors might benefit from a phone call at this point. But actually what it means then is, from the donor experience point of view, again, which, you know, Rich was alluding to, that the actual interaction feels much more human, because actually it's you know, it's a human being taking time to call you and sort of build that relationship. But, you know, there's essentially sort of tech working away in the background to flag that, you know, those are the people that might need to be spoken to. So I thought that was lovely, actually, the idea that AI could be working to help us create much more of a sort of human experience for our donors.
So true, isn't it? And it's, again, we have all this data and we collect all this data, but actually once you've collected the data, maybe an AI is better than we are at actually analysing it and judging the best route forward. Just depends on the one we use. Great.
And we can spend our time in, you know, as Richard said, that real core fundraising skill of building those relationships. So
absolutely, yeah, and it's still a person that picks it up. You're not sending a message from the robot or anything. It's really powerful, isn't it? So the book then, the Fundraising Strategy book, a couple of questions. What motivated you to work together? I'm sure DSC hunted you down a little bit, but how did this happen? How did you end up working on the book together?
We've worked on a few things together in the past, haven't we, Richard?
We have. We trust each other. We've worked as freelancers together on a range of projects, and also delivered training together, and know that it's a shared passion. I've been banging on about fundraising strategy for a good 10-15 years.
Yeah.
Great. And so where can people get their hands on the book?
Well, this book.
Absolutely.
Well compared, Richard.
So it's available on the DSC website, obviously.
Yep.
And am I allowed to mention other retailers? So it's available on the Waterston's website, I believe, and also Amazon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anywhere books should be, it should be. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us today and answering some of the questions from our listeners. And of course, thank you for the book and presenting that. And I'm getting through it at the moment, and a big support for me. I talk a lot about fundraising strategy, and having the opportunity to learn in that way is really nice. And I think when we're talking about supporting people, our motto is helping you to help others. The book is a really cost-effective way to get started, actually. And if you are sat there listening to this thinking, gosh, I need to think about my strategy, maybe your first port of call is the book. It is to have a look at how we do this and to take the time in your own way to get through this. So thank you so much, Claire and Richard. And if people wanted to contact either of you, how would they get your details, or how could they reach out to you? Go on, Claire first, and then Richard.
I'm available on most social media platforms.
Yeah.
Or you can email me at claire@legacyfundraising.co.uk.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire. And Richard, what about you?
So yes, I'm on Twitter as @RichardSved.
Yeah.
So just my full name as one word.
Yeah.
You can find me on LinkedIn. Those are probably the easiest ways, or just Google me and you'll find where else I am.
Great. Perfect. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Claire. Well, we'll close the podcast there. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for watching Charity Questions by the Directory of Social Change. So this is the podcast where we bring charity experts to you and we ask them the questions that you provide us via social media. So if you want to get involved, please check out the Directory of Social Change on Instagram, Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, to hear more about this content and to learn more about Charity Questions, subscribe to our YouTube channel now, and of course like this video to let us know if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.